Okay, welcome back to the Tech Jobber podcast. And I'm super excited about this guest today because we've had some amazing cybersecurity guests over the last couple of weeks and even into last year. We have not had anyone at the executive level. So today I have my longtime friend and contact, Madhav Gopal, on. I worked with him back when he was at Comcast. He has now risen to the CISO level. And when we talk about high-paying technologies in cybersecurity, high-paying careers in cybersecurity, that all stems from someone at the top like him who makes the decision on what technologies to use and who to hire. So we're going to get into some of his best tips and his best advice for anyone looking to have an amazing career in cybersecurity. So Madhav, welcome to the show, man.
Chris, first of all, so happy to see you and so glad to be here. Happy to help in any way I can today.
Yeah. So I know when we talked about doing this, I know one thing you wanted to talk about was some of the key tips you had for people to get into cyber and, key things to look out for, key jobs to focus on. I kind of want to hear if there was a 22-year-old Madhav right now, what would you tell him? Because obviously at your level, you're dictating the future and you see what jobs are going to be a major part of the future. So let's hear it. Let's give your best advice on cyber.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. So I think the first thing I would say is that if you want to get into cyber, first really start learning how attackers think, right? If there's a hacker who is targeting a system or an application, right? Really understanding how they are kind of trying to penetrate, right? That is super important. So as someone who's starting on the career, it's really important to stay curious and to never stop learning, right? That's number one. Number two, there's so many different parts of cyber, right? And, I'll just talk about three parts. I'm sure there are more, right? First is the technical part, right? You can become really good at networking. You can really become good at cloud security, at threat analysis, right? You can use that to kind of get into cyber, or you can go the risk and compliance path, right? You can say, hey, look, I really understand, all the different, regulatory aspects that are out there. I understand what companies need to do from a compliance perspective, right? And then the third, but not the least, is, you can come from the business side as well. You can be in IT or you can be in another part of the business. You really understand the business and you're able to learn, right? And there's no, right or wrong answer, right? At the end of the day, it's a combination of your technical skills, your ability to really, go into the details, but also be able to zoom out and say, hey, do I understand what the business is trying to do? And how can cybersecurity enable that? And that's probably the most important, right? Being able to, do that convergence of security and, what the business strategy needs to be, it is really important.
Yeah. So, and then what about the advice for young people? They've heard cyber pays a lot of money. That's probably what initially piqued their interest. And then if they kind of have some, interest in the topic after that, then they would pursue a career. I mean, what would you tell someone right now to get a career in cyber?
Yeah, I think get hands-on, right? Get that experience. So a lot of people think that, hey, if I get these 5 certifications, I'm good, right? It's less about certifications and more about mindset. The more you can apply yourself, the more you can figure things out, the more you can question and see why something's happening. I think that's really important. And, to your point about high-paying jobs, why are cyber jobs so high-paying, right? Because companies value cyber a lot, right? Because cyber allows the company to protect its data, its reputation, and most importantly, the trust that the company has with its customers, partners, any kind of stakeholder, right? So you really have to say, okay, if this company is trying to achieve these objectives from a cyber perspective, what do I have to offer? What are the key things that I can do that are really good and that make me indispensable to the company, which really gets me through the door and then potentially to grow it all, right? Because, I have a college-year-old son, right? And I tell him, hey, think about your next job or your first job, but also think about the 5 jobs after that, right? What are the skills that you need that will help you, right? So obviously, get the technical expertise, but also build your soft skills, build your ability to work with different parts of the company, whether it's an engineer or the accountant in the finance department.
Yeah. Any specific technologies, obviously at your level, you're making the choice to kind of integrate high level technologies, things like that. So you've probably at least been pitched everything at some, right? What do you think? Wow, these guys are going to be very big in 5 to 10 years, pretty much now.
Yeah, my suggestion would be that it's better to be less prescriptive, but having, a sense of cloud security, having a sense of endpoint security. So you can be an AWS expert, or you can be good at Azure. You can be, good at endpoint security in CrowdStrike, or you can use some other path. So it's not about, hey, you need these five, checkboxes, but it's more like, okay, do you understand how this, platform or this technology works? And do you know, most importantly, as I said it at the beginning, right? Do you know how the vulnerabilities that technology can be exploited and how you can protect against those, threats with that platform?
Yeah. Yeah. And I know when we spoke about doing this, you mentioned AI is a force multiplier in cyber. What do you recommend there? Where you falls there?
Yeah, I think a lot of people have been doing this, but really get good at, using AI to supplement your skills, right? You know, Many people think that, hey, at the end of the day, AI is going to replace everybody. Yeah, it might. But right now, the more you can do with AI, the more you are able to perform, right? And if you just look at cybersecurity, right? I work for a small company and I have worked at a Fortune 30 in the past, as, Chris referred to. But AI really helps with things like, any kind of automated threat detection, accelerating incident response, looking for patterns, right? So if you think of repetitive tasks, if you are able to harness AI to do that, you can use AI to write a policy for, third-party security, right? So there are a ton of things, and the key is to integrate AI thoughtfully. And the more you use it, whether you are a software developer, right? If you are a software developer who wants to move into cybersecurity, use AI to make your code more secure, right? Use AI to do, secure by design, right? So there are different aspects you can do that. It is figuring out, hey, which is the most beneficial use of that and how you can complement it with what you bring to the table, where I think is the sweet spot.
Yeah, and it was one thing I want to ask anyone in higher capacity. Obviously, we started working together 15 years ago, where you were kind of at the senior manager level, uh, which you were directly involved in hiring the individual contributors. So, what are some of your maybe unique, maybe not unique things you'd like to ask on interview that have maybe elicited some responses that have maybe got someone the job or cost someone the job that was with very good?
Yeah, I think, for me, it comes down to the why, right? So really understanding, how people think, right? If they take a certain decision, right? So yeah, I love case-based thinking, right? I would tell me about a time when you had to, do some kind of work in cybersecurity, whether it's, hardening a system or, or figuring out how to mitigate the threat, right? And I always like to expand how you're thinking, what are the steps that you're taking and what are you considering to come to that conclusion, right? So it's really important to understand the why and having a well thought out process, right? To say, okay, this is the reason why I'm doing, right? And the reason I say that is because a lot of cyber professionals think that, hey, it's all about fun, right? Fear, uncertainty, and doubt. It's not that. At the end of the day, your job, right, is to support the business, right? So if there's no business, right, if the business is not moving forward, there's no cybersecurity, right? So you really have to say, okay, look, I took these 3 steps to allow me to move forward, right? So the example I'll give is, one of the questions that I love to ask is, hey, I'm, building a mobile app, right? Or you're building a mobile app, right? As a interviewee, what are the considerations from a security standpoint you think, right? Would you think about, secure store? Would you think about power outage? Would you think about, principle of, least privilege in terms of access, right? So those are the kind of things that are really important to say, okay, why would you consider certain things, and how would you go about it?
Yeah, and any bad interview stories, and yeah, I certainly think anything that sticks out.
Yeah, I think this would be uh, the most off-putting things are when people have all these things on their resume, and when we start talking about it, it's all like built on a house of cards, right? So it's just be authentic, right? Have and then the things that you don't have to use a kind of buzzwords. You don't have to say, okay, it's cybersecurity. I've worked with CrowdStrike or worked with this one. Show me a pattern where you work with a platform, whether it's cybersecurity or some other area, right? Which you're able to bring to bear in what we are doing as a company, right? So it is really being authentic and really being able to, make those correlations. Saying, someone might have worked in a non-profit. Like some of my best hires are from, parts of, industry which have no correlation to what I've done, right? At Comcast, I was famous for hiring people in operations. He didn't have an operation background, but they absolutely flourished because they had an engineering background and they were able to put things out. Same thing in cybersecurity, right? Having the understanding of, okay, how the business is working, what are the things I need to do, but we get it tied back to the experience. It becomes really important as a first because having a bunch of keywords and projects that really don't fly.
Yeah. Okay. So why don't we talk about Comcast? That's obviously the most, from a company perspective, that's the most prominent place you've worked. When I first met you, you were not like Mr. Cybersecurity, right? It was more of we kind of had like Linux admins, we had incident managers, we had maybe DevOps. That's right. So how did let's talk about that time frame, what you were doing then. Obviously, you were heavily involved in the X1 box. Went through about 10 name changes since I first met you.
Right.
Yeah, I believe they still call it the X1, correct?
Yeah. They still call it the X1 platform, right? And it's very interesting, right? Because my journey at Comcast kind of even started before Comcast, right? So, I started actually as a software developer, right? So working for the software company. At some point, I said, hey, I love what I'm doing. It comes with a path. I don't love how I'm doing it, right? So I kind of switched into consulting with Deloitte Consulting for 5 years. And then I transitioned to PwC. So I thought I was cool. And at PwC, I really got into security and risk consulting, right? And that kind of led me to technology audit, right? Which then led me to Comcast because this is, 2005, so almost actually 20 years back. So Comcast was building out their technology audit function, right? It was still a very large company, but not as big as we know it today. And technology audit was fairly new. I was one of the leaders who came in and built out a technology audit function. And that was a blast, right? As part of the audit team, you kind of get to work with all the different parts of the business. And we really help them understand this. And what was interesting is that my purpose was not the traditional compliance stuff like SOX or VCIDSS, right? Or even HIPAA. It was more like, hey, you're a service delivery organization. You're an engineering organization. How do we make sure that we, understand and mitigate the risk that we have and allow you to, be more effective in what you're doing, right? So it was kind of using technology, but in a way that had a direct impact to the operations and the sustenance of the business, right? So I did that for about 4 or 5 years at Comcast, and then I moved to the role that you and I started working together, which was in operation. And again, I was new to operation, but I had the curiosity, I had the growth mindset, and that kind of dropped me in, and I built a team from scratch. I was employee number 1, and I basically set up production support for Comcast's next generation video camera, which came to be known as X1 Plus, right? And X1 was super interesting because we literally scaled from like hundreds of customers to like 15 million, customers in a few years, right? And now with the operation, on this period, really, I saying, hey, we had like 5 people now we need 50 people because we are. So you really have to be able to do more with less, but also at the same time use technology. You have to use automation, right? And you have to also make sure that your team is picking up the skills needed to support the organization, right? And as you probably recall, Comcast was, leading edge of everything for Xbox, right? Whether it's, using AWS, whether it's using DevOps, DevSecOps, right? So really being able to hire people who had the skills to grow with the organization and be able to contribute and not just, be an operational, block attack, but, bringing that curiosity and the growth mindset to kind of scale as the company scales.
Yeah. And why don't you talk a little bit about kind of what it was like? Obviously you have your job to do, right? And you have your team to manage. But one thing I noticed with Comcast, I don't deal with Comcast anymore, but it seemed like there was just a constant like Game of Thrones battles with the management and staff and people knifing each other in the back during meetings. And that was your response. Well, why don't you talk a little bit about that? Because I always found that interesting.
Yeah, I think, look, the one thing I'll say is that it is not unusual for any large company to have that kind of, I would say, organizational dynamics, right? And I think the way you have to look at it is, as a company grows larger and there are so many specialized functions, there are going to be overlaps, right? So a lot of times, when something especially drops, people kind of tend to take out, the finger pointing game and start kind of pro, right? But I think the approach that I always took was, hey, look, at the end of the day, we are just together, right? If something fails, if we have a bigger incident or, whether it's on the production side or on the cybersecurity side, it's not you or me or everybody, it's an entire company, right? So our job is to, number one, understand how we can prevent this, right? And number two, if something like that does happen, how do we contain the blast radius? And number three, most importantly, how do we learn from these things? Like I really enjoyed, running incidents because I felt that you could always learn something from that, right? And you could also use that to build relationships across organizations. And that was the other thing I will advise, to your listener and blog. Empathy is super important, right? You are going to be working with a lot of different people in your career, really understanding where they're coming from, really saying, okay, look, let me understand what you're trying to do. Let me see how I can help you so that you can help me achieve my goals as well, right? So really, it's always a give and take. It doesn't matter whether you're a mentor or mentee, doesn't matter whether you're a manager or a, individual contributor, right? So those things are really important. And the example I always like to say is that, hey, if I'm calling the head of engineering at 2 a.m., I better come from a position of, credibility, right? I'll come from, hey, I know what I'm doing. And I know that this is bad and this is why I feel it is bad. But also I respect you and I know what you do, right? And I'm not just going to suddenly, find your number in the, Outlook contacts and call you, but I'll have a relationship with you. And I am someone here who's here to help you, not just to make you look bad or say, hey, why did you let this particular production system fail, or why did you let this particular breach happen, right? So that is a very important approach to build those relationships. Doesn't matter who it is, right? And people are always going to be defensive, they're always going to be territorial, but you really have to approach from a position of understanding where they're coming from and how you can help person for.
Yeah. Well, I think I stopped working with Comcast around 2016. They did kind of vendor consolidations. And we were on the outside looking in basically because a lot of our work was going to be high-end stuff with groups like yours, some of the other guys, remember Jeremy Kramer, Jan Hallwire, some of those guys. But the problem was we didn't have enough volume. We had very tough specialized searches, but we didn't have the volume. So probably after I was not working with them, that was when you kind of switched over to cyber. So please tell us about.
Yeah. So, as I mentioned, I actually started on cyber a while back before Comcast, right? So I got my CISP 2003, right? So I've been in and out of cyber, and what made me very effective, my last role at Comcast, it was VP of Cybersecurity Operations, was that I understood the business so well, right? So obviously, I had the technical expertise from a cyber standpoint, but I also understood this large organization, all the moving parts. I knew a lot of leaders who are out there. I knew how to work with them in a more proactive manner as opposed to just saying, hey, something is, gone really south. How can I help? Right? So really, taking that the forward-looking approach was really important. But, the cybersecurity operation did not get a blast, right? Because, we're talking about a really large company with over 30 million subscribers, tons of data, tons of assets to protect. And, you're not just getting your typical, cyber criminals or the person sitting on their grandmother's couch in a basement somewhere, but you're also getting these nation state attacks, right? Which are not here for destructive or even, ransomware. They're just going to get in and they're going to stay low and they're going to steal your data over time, right? So really taking an approach to understanding, okay, how can we, for a company of this size with over 100,000, employees, how can you really enhance your defenses and your ability to identify these threats before they become a serious problem for the company?
And give us an example of maybe one of those wild threats that you guys faced.
Yeah. Yeah, I think, the example that always comes to mind is, when we started seeing, you know, signatures that showed that, hey, we had a intruder, and not only that the intruder was in, but they had repurposed. Luckily, it was contained to a very few systems. We were able to quickly figure it out. Fire incidents are not like the typical, hey, there's a production incident with you. You have to figure it out quickly and then you're done, right? You have to recover the business, but the industry is to the tail head, right? So, after we found that signature, we had to take the time to understand, hey, how far have we moved in the net, right? What have they answered? Like literally, we went application of the application, trying to see what we could see the log. And there's a lot of lessons that you learn as you go through, right? Because not all systems are created equally. And some systems are better at capturing information, other systems do not. So that was probably one of the most important things that we really have to, you're only as strong as your biggest, right? If you have a side window or some kind of a vulnerability in your perimeter, you are still vulnerable, right? So that was one of the biggest statements. That's what I always encourage for cyber, right? We're trying to make it a real cyber. It is about thoroughness of myths, right? If you look at any of the major breaches, whether the Equifax, where they had this one, dispute reporting database, right? That nobody even knew who the owner was. That was not patched, right? So those are the kind of things that become very important, whether it's a small company they are a large company, like where I was just years back.
Yeah, so I know, I think the last time we got together, you had mentioned your interest in potentially moving to a startup. And when you left Comcast, you went to a place called Jukebox. Was that a startup or was that was a...
Yeah, so Jukebox like a startup, very early stage startup, and I was one of the founding, team members. So I was a CISO and I was also responsible for IT. But basically what Jukebox was pioneering fintech that specializes in fractionalized music and, investments. So if you think of your favorite song, let's say, you're a Swift fan, you love listening to Taylor Swift, right? But just like, you can buy an Apple iPhone, or you can actually buy a stock of Apple, right? And benefit each time someone buys an iPhone, right? We said, hey, why don't we allow music fans, investors who have the opportunity to buy a fractionalized share of, their favorite artists or their favorite songwriters, work, right? That way, each time someone buys that, they are getting a dividend or the loyalty payment over time, right? So it was a pretty cool concept. So I was with them for, nearly 2 years. And I think around maybe 5 or 6 months back, thing with the startup changing from the business direction. And I said, okay, it was the right time for me to kind of look at other opportunities. And I landed also at a smaller company, but we are actually a public company and we have been around for a while. And what's interesting is that we are technology first company, right? In the sense that we build, what's known as geolocation, right? So you think of technologies that allow our GPS capabilities to be enhanced, right? Think of geolocation, right? All of those pieces are things that my current company, TextMat, works on.
Yeah. So, I mean, what are some of the differences? I mean, what were some shocking things going from obviously all trades resources, Fortune 30 to startup? A lot of startups don't even, unless you're coming out of a bank company, which, Comcast is not quite there, basically, but they don't even like to touch me. So, what was a bit shocking for you there?
The first thing I'd say is that at a startup, it was so much easier to get things done, right? So at large companies, if you have to hire someone, there are literally layers and layers of approvals. At a startup, I was like, hey, I have the budget. I'm going to go hire someone. I'm going to get a few folks from my team, my peers interview, boom, right? So that's number one. Number two is just the ability to be part of the team making the decisions, right? So even though my focus was cybersecurity and technology, I was actually sitting in the leadership meeting. I reported into the CEO. I was sitting in the planning discussion as the business was being built. I was contributing as well, right? So, and I was, because I was not from the music industry and I was not from the fintech industry, I always had those left brain questions, which actually was valued a lot, right? So that was the other thing. But also, in a startup, you always have to make do with less, right? So I had to figure out, hey, now if we are buying this particular platform, they're going to charge us to do the whole SSO integration. Maybe we don't do that. Maybe we use Google's, we give it a Google shop, right? Google Workspace. We use Google's social sign-on to allow folks to get that SSO benefit, right? So those are the kind of things that I really found really, exciting and exhilarating in a startup that I, unfortunately missed in a large company. But, large companies, there are other aspects. There's a lot of different kinds of roles. So you can move around quite a bit, which is why, at Comcast, I was there for 17 years. And I did like 6 or 7 different, job functions before I moved out.
Yeah. And I think that is, a lot of people say change jobs every 2 years, but in the right company, you're still acquiring different types of skills. You're not, but even you were there for many years, you never stayed snagged. So I think it's very important.
Yeah, I've never actually had the luxury to stay stagnant, but I also benefited from the relationships. Like literally all the jobs at Comcast, including my first, was because, I knew someone who knew someone else who was looking for, a particular kind of candidate. And they were like, hey, why don't you, you get up, get set up with Madhav and talk to him, right? So I would strongly recommend that to your, audience to really build those relationships across their career, whether they're in school or whether they're just starting to work, right? Because that's going to be your launching pad for the rest of your career, right? Yes, you can probably, find jobs on LinkedIn and apply, but so are 1,000 other people doing that, right? So you really want that, X factor through these relationships. And it's not just about relationships, it's about people who can vouch for you. Because, the biggest risk for me as an employer is to bring someone who is a completely different candidate and what they looked on paper or what they sounded on the interview. And then you're like, it's super expensive and disruptive for the company to do that, right? But if I have someone that, Chris, you vouch for because you worked with them, you saw, their working style and you saw how successful they were, I'm going to take that person in, even if they meet only like 60 or 70% of my, the job criteria. Right. So that's the advice I would get, that really have those, kind of pivot points in your career who can help you move forward.
Yeah. Yeah. And then one thing, just to cut quick here, it's a bit, what do you see? Obviously, you've been part of the behemoth corporation. You've been a part of startup. Now you're at public, a huge company. Where do you see things going? What are your goals here? One potentially get huge.
Yeah. I think, what I would say is that cybersecurity is becoming more and more, integral to the business, right? So as a CISO, I feel that, hey, I'm not just responsible for security, but I'm an executive within the company. And I have to understand what the business is doing to provide the most value, right? And I think, from a future standpoint, it's really about, leadership and influencing culture as about managing the risk, right? So you have to, continuously learn, you have to adapt and understand how security drives value, right? At my last company and the startup, it was a music company. So I had to be creative in terms of how folks would, relate to security. And I always said, it's about, think about how it as a sports car, right? In a sports car, the brakes are super important, right? Because we don't have high quality brakes, you're not going to be able to go fast because you're going to crash, right? So think of security as the brakes in the sports car that actually let you go faster because you have those guard brakes that make sure that you're able to do what you need. Whether it is basic things like, authentication and two-factor, right? Or making sure that you have, the right people accessing the right documents, right? So you have to really figure out how you can build security everyday life, how to go bolting security on after the fact, after a product has been built.
Yeah. And then just to take it home, what's, people that are watching this will, be looking to get into cybersecurity. Any last tips or information that think will help?
The main thing I'd say is that there's two things, right? One is that there are many different paths, right? As I said, you can come the technical path, you can come the business path. So don't get disheartened if you're first, if you're trying to break into cyber and your, the first job is not in cyber. Use that job to learn about the business and learn how you can, use those skills in cyber, right? So for instance, you want to get in cyber, but you start in IT, right? You're in IT operation, you're in IT support, but that's great. You understand how users work. You understand how users, reset their password. You understand what kind of issues they have, right? All those are valuable things for people. So that is one. Two is, this is not a mission, but the career is not a sprint. It's a marathon. So take the time, build those relationships, keep learning. You will have, there will be time, what about my career, I would like, at Comcast, at the home, I rose up, hey, what am I doing? Just the right spot. But you have to, keep going. And then, sometimes, most of the time, actually, it's not the destination, but it's the journey that matters and how you go about that journey that can really, power your career forward.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, I think this is an amazing, like I said, this will be an amazing complimentary episode because we've had individual contributors, we've had consultants in cyber, people that train people in cyber, and now we get to hear kind of you from a bird's eye view, the executive level, just on kind of how this all works, how someone could potentially work their way out and get to your position. Because so they pay the executive. Yeah, absolutely. And, at the end of the day, one can I'll say that probably, you can relate to the part. It's about being able to story tell and being able to say, okay, this is what I'm working on. How can I come up to this? How can I really tie it back, in a way that it makes sense to my audience? Your audience can be the CEO where you share a 30-second elevator ride, or your audience can be the lead architect for the company, right? So it's really trying to, advocate for yourself, advocate for your work, be able to, pitch your ideas in a way that resonates, right? It's a very important skill, I have a technical background. I'm an electrical engineer. I worked with a software developer. I worked with a technology consultant. But I'm always working on how better to get my point across, not just to one set of audience, multiple different types of posts who can have the most influence. What I'm like. Yeah, awesome. That's amazing advice. Thanks so much for coming on. And I hope you guys got a lot out of it. And catch you next time.
No, thank you, Vince. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Madhav.
Take care.